Hello and welcome to Freethought Forum. This is a program brought to you by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee, bringing the voice of the Freethought community to the Knoxville area by TV. I'm Larry Rhodes.
And I'm Joe Barnhart.
And we want you to know that if you don't believe in God, you're not alone. Today we'll be talking about ethics. We'll be taking calls at 215-2288. We'll be talking about ethics. Are they relational? Are they divine? We'll be more than happy to talk about it.
Yes. In fact, we might ask, where does ethics come from? Let me suggest common sense and human desires.
Community.
The desire for freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And, for example, you're a parent. You know you have to teach your children that they cannot have everything they want. But you are not denying them all their freedom. You're saying that if you want freedom, you have to curtail certain things, and that's how morality gets started. Some things have to be restrained and controlled in order to have other things to develop and flourish.
Ethics is really a contractual agreement between you and the rest of society. If you want to be able to do certain things in a society, you have to abide by certain rules that will allow the society to prosper.
A good example would be traffic laws.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these rules don't drop in out of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
They emerge slowly over the centuries. First, you had rules in walking on paths.
Right.
And now we have rules that get us from Lenore City to Knoxville.
Right. And rules about private property and theft.
Mm-hmm. Imagine a society that had no rules against thievery. What a miserable society.
Right.
A thief could not make a living because everybody would be a thief and nobody would be working for a living.
Right. And you hear so much about, like, no rules Australian football, but they have to agree on certain things, like no guns. They have to agree on starting at a certain time and ending at a certain time, type of thing. So rules are necessary for to reach a common goal, like having a friendly game.
As a matter of fact, that may be a good way to think of how ethics began.
Mm-hmm.
Boys and girls used to get on the playground before they had adults coaching them all the time, and they invented their own rules because they wanted to have fun rather than mayhem. So common sense develops into a common consensus. Let's agree that some things we will do and not do, whether you're a Jew or a Hindu or a Christian or an atheist or a Buddhist.
Right.
You live in a society that's to your advantage to have certain rules and regulations.
And one of the first things you'll agree on is not to harm each other. That's strictly out the window unless you want to live as a hermit or live on an island by yourself, because if you start harming your fellow man, they're either going to shun you or put you away.
Yeah, even a hermit has to have certain rules for himself. Otherwise, he will end in self-destruction.
Right, depending on the goals he has for himself.
And what's our motive for being moral? Well, one of which would be we identify with the community. Imagine living alone for 20 years. Wouldn't be a very happy life. So most of the joys, I think you might agree, that we have are with other people. And that means we have to have right away respect for other people.
Even in our society by itself, living alone for 20 years is called solitary, and we use it as a punishment.
Yes.
Some people say that our rules of ethics came from a deity, a god, and there are certain problems with that. One of the main problems was posted many thousands of years ago. I'm not really sure who brought up the Euthyphro dilemma. Do you remember who that might have been?
Well, you have the dilemma among the Greeks. Formulating is God. Well, you got Euthyphro.
That's what I was saying. I don't know who actually brought it to light.
In Euthyphro, Socrates and others are asking the question, do you do something because the gods say so? Is that what makes it good, or is it good and then the gods do it?
Do the gods tell you it's good because it's already good? And that's a dilemma, because if God is the author of what's actually right and wrong, if we do what is right and wrong because he says it's right and wrong, then he could change his mind tomorrow or even then in the next hour, making killing and thievery good. And
there are passages in the Bible that seem to support slavery.
Right.
But there are other passages in the Bible that are the very opposite, in which you don't treat people...
Talk about respecting your fellow man.
The golden rule rules out slavery. Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, said we should treat all human beings as ends in themselves and never as means only.
Right.
And that immediately means you don't engage in slavery. Now, we all agree sometimes to become a tool or an instrument in our work, but that's a free choice, and we get compensated for it. We're not just a means, however.
Right. And the other side of the Euthyphro dilemma coin is that if God just lets us know what's good or bad because it's already good or bad, then it really reduces the deity or God to being a messenger boy, and is basically an unnecessary being, because we could figure out what's right and wrong on our own without having to have someone tell us what's right and wrong, and which is what we've done over the course of many centuries.
Yeah, another reason for being a decent and good person is that it has good consequences. In fact, that's how I think ethics also developed, is murder, lying, stealing, rape, all of those things have horrible consequences, and we have learned to control it and make a rule against it.
And we punish it as a society, not just as individuals. We've decided as a society that would not tolerate these things.
Yes. In fact, we even control personal revenge, because we know that does more harm than good.
Right.
So ethics is a community development, just as language. I think most of you might agree we are not born with a conscience. If you've talked to or try to talk to a 2-year-old, sometimes the word no comes up quite a bit. The 2-year-old is learning conscience, and that takes a long time, because the community, the mother is the major figure, and then all the other figures, teachers and fathers, come in to help develop a conscience.
Right. And logic and rationality comes in there too, because it doesn't take long for that child to realize that if your father says no, but then their father goes ahead and does it, it doesn't take him long to question that. But he better come up with a good reason.
He has a good sense of contradiction.
Right, that's right. Yeah. The father can say, only because I said so, only so often, until the child comes to understand why the father was saying that.
Yeah, a child is a child, but eventually you have to treat them as more than just children.
There's an old saying, is ethics is doing what is right, no matter what you're told. But a religious dogma or a dogma of any kind is doing what you're told, no matter what is right. And that's one of the biggest problems that we as atheists would have with the religious teachings and dogma. For example, you're told not to lie. It's a sin to lie. You cannot lie. Don't lie. But if your sister came to you in the middle of the night saying that her husband was beating her, and she was fearful for her life and wanted you to help her, you would take her in, give her a place to stay, give her food and whatever she needed to make her safe. And when her husband came to the door, you would lie to him, unless you had, of course, force enough to be able to just.
If he had a gun, you would.
If he had a gun or something, you would certainly lie to him to tell him that she wasn't there, and that would be the ethical thing to do, which is in direct opposition to a particular commandment or a particular rule.
In fact, you can have. I think all people recognize there are noble exceptions, but the only thing that you could say would make you violate one moral law is another. You have a moral law to protect life.
Right. Or to minimize harm.
Or to minimize harm, For example, in military life, you sometimes do have to lie. You don't say lying is by principle wrong. You simply say there are other values that override that in that particular situation.
Yeah, and a lot of the religious people would say that, well, that's situational ethics, and we cannot have that. But they themselves practice that on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, you had Joshua as spies going into the other tribe, and a spy has to be deceitful.
Right. Well, God telling Abraham to murder his own son, saying that he wanted a child sacrifice, that in itself was a lie. If he's going to turn right around and say, oh, I was just kidding, I didn't really mean that.
Now Christians, I know, and Jews too, do not think there was a real voice from God telling Abraham to commit murder.
But there was a real voice from God telling Adam that if he ate the apple, he would die.
That's what the literature says. But whether there was a real being
if we're
doing
going
that.
if we're going to question the literature on that point, when do we stop questioning the literature?
You don't stop questioning.
No, you don't.
That's part of, whether it's something you wrote or I wrote or someone else.
Right.
And questions are good.
You have to use your critical mind and your rational thought to be able to make sense of the world, and it never ends. You need to keep exercising that right, that ability.
Let's return to the concept of freedom.
Okay.
We all believe freedom is a good thing. We also believe that in some cases freedom is a horrible thing because it pulls the rug out from under a lot of our other freedoms. So it isn't that we deny freedom, we simply control some freedoms for the sake of others. And that's how I think ethics and morality began. And that's also the way it probably continues.
Well, talking about slavery, looking at that in the Bible, the Bible never refutes slavery. Certainly today we would say it's not a very ethical practice. It certainly mitigates the rights of the few for the rights of the many, or the rights of the slave owners. It was a perfectly profitable thing for it to be a slave owner at the time, but it certainly causes a lot of harm and a lot of anguish to the slavee.
It is true that the Apostle Paul did not come outright and oppose slavery.
Nobody does.
And that has given some biblical scholars some cause to raise an eyebrow. But you could say the Apostle Paul and parts of the New Testament and parts of the Old Testament give principles, clear principles, to make slavery not moral.
Well, a lot of, biblical scholars would say that the neighbor that you're talking about is other Jews. And that if you invade another camp that's non-Jewish or non-Israeli, if you invade another country, it's perfectly legal and sound and logical for them to take those slaves and treat them any way they want to, even though the Bible may say something else about treating your neighbor correctly.
Well, the Hebrew Bible also says that they are to be kind to strangers, which violates this other notion.
Well, yes.
So what I'm suggesting, and I think you are too, is the Bible is an incredible library. It's not one book. And you can see the debates going on within the literature itself.
Right.
I mean, it is a whole history of, in my opinion, great literature. And if we try to understand, these are people trying to solve their problems in their day as best they can.
And not the voice of a deity coming down telling them what to write.
And that's why we can learn from them, because we're doing the same thing. We're trying to solve our problems in our day.
Trying to make sense of the world.
And so we try to learn from them. And if they make mistakes, we learn from that. If they have great insights, then we borrow them.
A lot of people say that the Bible is a book of multiple choice, because you can pick and choose whatever you want to out of it to support what you believe.
We've got a call here. Let's see. Let's go. Go ahead, please.
Now we have your name.
Hi, I'm Ken.
Welcome.
Hi. Well, you're talking about slavery. I just wanted to, number one, Exodus 21:7 talks about the niceties of selling your daughter as a slave. You can sell her to a fellow Jew, but you cannot sell her to a pagan, that sort of thing.
So you can keep Jews as slaves, is what you're saying. But if you sell your daughter, that would be Jewish, yes.
Let me ask you this. I'm assuming you two guys are, from academia or whatever, and where you associate with people where being atheist is, not frowned upon. I'm with a bunch of people. I work with a bunch of people, associate with a bunch of people